Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. This is the beginning. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to continue where we left off with the RPA 2 weeks ago because last week we didn't have a class. So hopefully you guys are coming back from part one. If you haven't seen part one, you could go to YouTube and check out part one. So that way you can get caught up, or you can watch these together later. But let's go ahead and share the screen and we'll get started right where we left off last time. So what you should be seeing right now is the top of paragraph 3 of the RPA. We finished with the deposit 2 weeks ago. We were talking about that the deposit is the only time period in the contract that is referred to by using business days. Everything else is calendar days. So you have to understand that. And we'll get more into days as we get deeper and deeper into the RPA and talk about those things. But just as a precursor, just to kind of set the stage, is every day counts. Holidays count, weekends count, they all count. They just don't count for performance. Like, we can't close on Christmas Day. We can't close on New Year's Day. We can't ask somebody to remove contingencies on a holiday. We can't ask somebody to remove contingencies on a weekend, right? We can't close on a Saturday or Sunday because escrows aren't open. But they do count as days. So you have to count them as you're looking at going forward in your contingency periods and the amount of days that you have to work on something. Those days do count, right? So if I get an offer accepted today and I have 10 days to do inspections, Saturday and Sunday count as day 2 and 3 in that process of getting to 10 days. So it's understanding that part of it helps you as you kind of progress forward with your buyers. And you have to explain that to the buyers so that they know that they have to take action right away. They can't wait. Well, it's the weekend, so we'll take our time. We'll figure it out on Monday. They don't have that ability. So you've got to make sure that that's super clear with your clients, okay? So increased deposit. An increased deposit, as you see here in paragraph 3D2. And again, I think I said this 2 weeks ago. All the negotiation is done in paragraph 3. This whole section, all this grid that we're going to go through in the next couple of weeks is all paragraph 3. So if you ever have a conversation with me, if we're ever referencing something that's in the contract, paragraph 3 is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say 3A, 3B. These paragraph numbers, and I'm sure I said this 2 weeks ago, but I just want to reiterate, these paragraph numbers that are over to the side where you see that, that's an explanation of this section of paragraph 3. It's not where the negotiation is done. So if I'm referencing a counteroffer or if I'm talking about something, it's going to be by 3 and these letters, not by these numbers and paragraph numbers here, okay? Increased deposit. So an increased deposit is something other than the initial deposit. It's not a replacement of, it's an additional deposit over and above the initial deposit that we've done, okay? So really, that's not something that we use often. It's not like if I were to get a counter offer back saying, hey, your deposit is $5,000, we want your deposit to be 10. They're not talking about an additional increased deposit. They're talking about increasing your initial deposit, not an additional deposit. What the increased deposit is mainly for is if, let's say, I don't have all of the funds available right now at this moment for the initial deposit. So let's put a scenario as where you would use increased deposit, and really the only way you use increased deposit. I mean, not the only, but the most common. So I have an offer, I'm writing an offer on a property that say it's, $1 million, and they want a 3% initial deposit, right? 3% of the purchase price as the initial deposit, which is not uncommon. I don't have that much cash liquid because I am using my 401k, right? I'm borrowing against my 401k to purchase this home. So the majority of my funds are in my 401k. So I have some cash. Let's say I have $10,000 for my initial deposit, but cash handy right now, since that money's coming from my 401k, I don't have it yet. But I still do want to give you the give you the deposit that you're asking me for, seller and listing agent. And in order for me to get my funds from my 401k, what do I have to be able to get those funds, to get that borrowed? Do you guys know what I need to have to borrow that money? Anybody?
Your offer.
Yeah, I have to have an accepted offer, not just an offer. I have to have an accepted offer. And besides that, once I have the accepted offer, to be able to access those funds is probably going to take me about 10 days to get that money. So let's say that all of my down payment, all of my extra money is in my 401k, but I want to abide by this counter that says, hey, it's 3% of the purchase price. So I need it's $1 million. So that's 30,000. I need additional 20,000. Fine. I'll check this box in D2 that says increased deposit. I'll put $20,000 in here, right? Because I'm accessing it from my 401k. And then by default, I have to put that money in when I remove my contingencies. I'm not doing that because I want to make it like my initial deposit. I want to put it in right away. So I'm going to put it as soon as it's available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to guess, give myself some time as to how long it takes to access the funds from my 401k. We probably should have done that, that research prior to to using it. So we know, hey, talk to the 401k. What's the turnaround process on the accepted offer, the whole thing. And then put a date in here. Like maybe it's 2 weeks from now, right? 2 weeks after acceptance, I'm going to put the $20,000 in. And it says right here, use form DID at the time the increased deposit is made. What that DID form does is it makes this deposit, this increased deposit that comes later in the transaction, makes it part of liquidated damages, just as if it were the initial deposit. That's the most common way you're going to use increased deposit. The majority of the time, you're not going to need it. You're not going to use it. Okay. Any questions about increased deposit? No? All right. All right. Here we get into the loan. And this is really, I feel like for some reason, is the hardest part for agents to comprehend the importance of filling this part out properly. It's a lot of issue. And even, talking with you guys in person and trying to explain why it exists the way it is. And you guys working with agents out there, when you try to counter things and clarify, it becomes difficult, right? So the loan amount, this is your main mortgage, right? This is your first trust deed. That's the loan. Okay. This amount that we're writing in here is whatever you're financing. So for example, if I had a sales price, let's say that, just so we can see the math, if my sales price is 900,000, did I get enough zeros in there? Or am I going to be 9 million now? No, it's 9 million. See? All right. So I'm 900,000, right? I have a $10,000 deposit. And let's say that I'm putting down 300,000, right? I'm putting down 300,000. My loan amount is going to be 600,000 because I'm putting down 300,000. Now, this percentage is not contractually, like you're not contractually obligated to remain at this percentage. It's just giving you what percent of the sales price your loan is. So now what it's going to show me is, after I do this, it's going to show me that what I owe for my down payment is $290,000 because I have a $10,000 deposit. So your deposit is deducted from your down payment because it becomes part of your down payment in your closing. So here I have my loan amount. So whatever you're borrowing, right, you got to take the sales price, subtract your down payment, and put that in as your loan amount. Okay. The next thing is, we've got to pick an interest rate. Remember, this is a contract. It's a legally binding contract. And for us as licensed agents, by filling out these contracts and negotiating these deals, we are practicing contract law. Okay. We're not lawyers, but we're practicing contract law, which means we have to understand that the pieces of these documents that we fill out, right, the parts of this contract that we fill out, are legally binding, all of them. And if there's holes, if there's things missing, if it's open for interpretation, that becomes dangerous. So we've got to be pretty clear on all of the terms. And one of the terms that for some reason we avoid like the plague as agents is being very clear on the maximum interest rate that our clients are willing to commit to in order to purchase this home. And that's what this is. It says not to exceed. It's defaulted to fixed rate, right? That's it. It's a fixed rate, in which most people are getting fixed rates, but adjustables could come back, right? I mean, I know they're out there, but they could become more prevalent. If it is an adjustable rate, right? If it is an interest rate that will change over the course of the loan, then you could start that way. Like, this is where we're going to start. The initial rate that we're starting at, this is what we're going to accept. But for the majority of the offers we're going to do, they're going to be a fixed rate loan. So I don't know, what rates are. I'm not going to try to quote rates, but for purposes of this example, let's say the common rate is 6.5%. I know it's not quite there yet, or it might be there. Who knows? Who knows when you're watching this video on YouTube? I don't even know where it's at today, but I know that it's fairly volatile. It's fluid right now. But let's just say for this example, the rate that they're qualifying for is 6.5%. Because rates change during the course of either from when they got their first approval or even once the offer is accepted, as we go through the transactions, rates can change. And so when I sit down with my clients, I have to make them understand that when we write this rate down, you're going to see a different rate than what you were quoted by your lender. And what that rate is it's the maximum interest rate you're willing to commit to in order to complete this purchase. Okay. What that means is you don't have to take that rate, but if for some reason the rate goes to that place and that's the only way you could qualify is by accepting that rate, then you're going to accept it and you're going to close. So my normal advice to you guys as agents is if they're, let's say like this one, 6.5, really you're probably safe with bumping up that interest rate by 0.25%. If the rates are super jumpy and you could talk to your lender about this, like, hey, what should I do? How do you feel about rates? You could put it up 0.5% and just say, okay, they're willing to pay up to 7. Now, again, I'm just using these numbers for an example. I don't know what the rates are going for right now. Okay. What this does is it commits my buyer to actually stay in the transaction. And if for some reason rates go nuts and it goes above this 7% or it goes above this 6.75 that we committed to, even if my buyer has removed all their contingencies, they can walk away without losing their deposit because this is a binding part of the contract. And usually what we do as listing agents, as buyer's agents, is we do this. We leave it blank. That's a problem because, like I said before, in a contract, which this is a legally binding contract, we've gotten together, we've negotiated a contract. We've now left a loophole. We've left a blank space. We've left ambiguity in the transaction. And what that means is instead of it either locking in or protecting a borrower, we've done neither. So you could make a case that if this is blank, when my buyer gets whatever their final interest rate is, whatever it is, even if it's less than what they originally were quoted when they wrote the offer, they could say, I didn't agree to pay this interest rate, I'm canceling. So now what? How do I explain to my seller as listing agent, because we left this blank, we gave them a loophole? Or vice versa. My buyer gets quoted all of a sudden after everything changes. In order for you to qualify, you have to pay this exorbitant rate. But we left it blank when we wrote the offer. Now my buyer doesn't even have that protection of saying, well, I didn't commit to such a high rate. Well, you didn't commit to any rate. So how can you use that as a way to escape? It could go both ways, right? You can make that argument from both sides. That, well, you didn't commit to any rate, so you're stuck. You're buying it or you're losing your deposit. And vice versa. Well, I didn't commit to a rate. I don't like this one, so I'm leaving and you got to give me my deposit. Now we have, two conflicting viewpoints on one thing that could have been very clear. So the only thing that should be here is what their rate is plus a minimum of 0.25% bump. If you feel like you want to be super conservative, like I want to make sure that then you go half a point. But I think, and again, just an opinion, I think we could be good with a 0.25% bump on whatever your rate is at the moment, because I don't think rates are quite that volatile. The other thing that I've seen here is BPR. People write BPR. Well, BPR is not a percentage. This is asking you for a number. It's not asking for letters, not asking for, and BPR, and for those of you who don't know what BPR is, best prevailing rate. Best prevailing rate. Okay, I commit to that. And I've seen listing agents counter back, buyer to agree to the best prevailing rate. Terrific. Here we go with ambiguity again. It's vague. Best prevailing rate when? Best prevailing rate when I got my offer accepted, or best prevailing rate when I got full loan approval? When is it? So I can make an argument. Well, I agreed to the best prevailing rate on, September 5th, on February 15th. On February 15th, I agreed. My rate, the best prevailing rate at that point was, 6.25. Now that I've got my approval, the rate is now 6.5 or 6.75. So I agreed to the best prevailing rate. And at that date, on the 15th, that was the rate. So now I've exceeded that. I'm out. That's my argument as buyer. My argument as seller now becomes, oh, no, the best prevailing rate at any point. So now at closing or at approval is the best prevailing rate. That's what I meant. Well, but that doesn't state that. So again, when you are vague in filling out a contract, you leave yourself open to those kind of arguments and those kind of discussions and those kind of disputes. But when we're crystal clear, this is the rate that we agreed to, everybody's locked in. All right, so I got a question here in the chat. It said, so if we put a 6.25 interest rate in and it turns out to be 7%, but we removed contingencies, they won't lose their deposit. How can we protect our seller on the listing side? Well, number one, the chances of it going up 0.75% are probably not super common, but that's what you do as a listing agent. If that is either blank or an amount that is too low for an interest rate, like say somebody puts, not to exceed 5%. Okay, well, we're not getting 5%. I'm going to, in my counter, I'm going to bump up the 0.5 point, right? So if they tell me 6%, I'm going to say 6.5. And if the rates aren't at 6, I know they're already higher than that, then I'm going to bump it up even more. I've had conversations with agents here in the office face to face where I've told them, you know what, just put 7%. Here's how things are. You have to understand the process based on the market we're in. And we've been in a seller's market for, there's probably people on this that have never seen a buyer's market. You haven't had a license in a buyer's market. We're in a seller's market. There's lack of inventory. I just started doing the statistics today to look at what's going on. And, in most of our market areas, there's less than 2 months of inventory. Less than 2 months. Right now, I think I was looking at, in I want to say in Norwalk, there's 8 active residential and residential income listings right now. So do you think that there is more demand than there is supply in a lot of the areas that we work in? Yeah, absolutely. So there are some things as a seller and as a listing agent that I can do to protect my seller in this kind of market that I may not be able to do in a buyer's market. But if the best way to protect your seller is to make sure that you look at this when you get an offer before you present it, and that you counter it to make it as close to as possible to them being protected. Like obviously we don't have a crystal ball. If we did, none of us would be in this class, by the way, because we'd all be rich and we wouldn't need it if we had a crystal ball. So we don't know what rates are going to do. We have no idea. All we could do is estimate, and we could hope, and we could do the best we can by building in that cushion. So again, as listing agent, I'm probably going to put 0.5 point. Like I'm going to want that 0.5 point cushion. If I get an offer though, where they've put a 0.25 point cushion on what their actual interest rate is and what the maximum they'll accept, I'm probably going to be good with it. But the thing is that most of the offers I see, and that's from you guys that work with me every day that write them, from most of the offers I see, that section is blank. And that makes me nervous. So again, nothing is foolproof, right? When we look at that question of what if the rate goes to 7 and they cancel, nobody could have foretold that it jumped 0.75 point in a 30-day escrow. Nobody. So you did your best, right? You put in that 6.5 or 6 3/4, and it exceeded that, and those people walked. Nothing you could do about it, but you did your best, and that's all you can do. Really, I hope that answers the question. All right. Any other question? Oh, now FHA, VA, seller financing, other. By default, this section is saying that this is a conventional loan. If it is anything other than conventional, I have to check off the box, right? So if it's a VA or an FHA, I'm going to check off FHA. And when I do that, when I check off FHA, it adds this form, and it'll do the same thing for VA. It adds this, the FHA VA amendatory clause. And that again also is something that affects the buyer's deposit. In an FHA loan or a VA loan, if the property fails to appraise for whatever price we write in here, so in this case, the offer price is $900,000, right? If we put $900,000 there and that property doesn't appraise for $900,000, even if I've removed all my contingencies, that buyer does not lose their deposit. And it's something that you guys have to understand as agents, that that's how it works. Okay. So keep in mind, it has to be included, that FHA VA mandatory clause, okay? Has to be included. And if I'm including that, I have to do it the right way. So again, we've talked about this. If I'm a listing agent, right? If I'm a listing agent and I get a VA offer or an FHA offer, let's stay away from VA for now. If I get an FHA offer and they've written an offer well over asking price, which today is not uncommon, right? That we get buyers that are writing these offers way over asking price. Then we have to address that, right? So if I'm going to say, hey, look, I am confident as listing agent, I listed this property for $850,000. I'm confident at $850,000 that this is going to appraise because that's what I sold to my sellers. And I get these crazy offers like this $900,000 and $925,000 and all these things, and they're FHA or they're whatever, and they say I'm going to pay the difference. Okay. If it's FHA, I am going to counter back when I counter the sales price. I'm going to counter that they have to sign a new FHA VA, a mandatory clause, with my original list price, because I didn't ask you to go up in price. You're the one who now offered to go up in price. I'm going to make sure that if you're either removing your appraisal contingency or promising to pay differences between appraised value and offer price, those kind of things, I don't want you to have the escape clause of the FHA VA mandatory clause that, oh, it didn't appraise for $900,000, I'm out. So you have to be conscious of that as a listing agent. Okay, so I got a couple questions here. What about a hard money loan? Okay, so a hard money loan probably are not going to check off any interest or anything in here about what they're paying, because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work the same as normal financing. You would probably write this offer just like you were writing cash, not check the all cash. Write it like you're paying all cash for it. And then down here in additional financing terms, you would just disclose that the buyer is obtaining hard money financing. Okay. Plus all the other forms, don't take them out. Okay, so Maria is saying, and we'll go through all these other forms as we get to them. So what she's saying is, don't take all the other forms out. Guys, just so you guys understand, when you do a transaction and you use a transaction coordinator or whatever, turn everything in. Make sure your client, your buyer, your sellers, everything, when you're accepting, all of this is signed and everything's turned in. Sign the counteroffer, sign the purchase agreement, sign the PRBS, sign the disclosure regarding, sign everything, turn it all in. Don't just come with an RPA. Okay, so there's a public service announcement for the transaction coordinators. Now let's get back into financing here. What if you write it as part of terms, no FHA appraisal contingency? You can't. FHA requires that form, but they don't require what amount is in there. So you can't counter out the FHA VA mandatory clause. You can't do it. If you don't have one, escrow will and then incorporate one, and they'll do it at sales price. So you have to have it. Can you cancel if it does not appraise if you have already removed the contingency, going back to the above question? Yes, you can if it doesn't appraise for the amount that's in the FHA mandatory clause. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Oh, or any other questions about financing, about the first trust deed before I move on? No? Okay. If you have FHA or VA, you have 17 days to ask for any lender required repairs. But just like in your inspection, there used to be a separate form for FHA and VA required repairs. There is not anymore. It's now part of the request for repairs. So all your stuff is going to get done at the same time. So it's really important that you guys do your appraisal as early as you possibly can, because here's what happens. If I have to send in a request for repairs and I have fewer days or whatever the case is, and I haven't got my appraisal yet, now I have to do a second request for repairs. It's a mess. Just get your appraisal done as fast as possible, okay? All right, additional financing, we're not gonna deal with that right now because right now there is no second trust deeds. We're not dealing with that now. That's not what, I'm not talking about like the silent seconds you get for down payment assistance and those things. Those don't get disclosed the exact same way. They're not an actual loan, okay? So this is, for those of you guys that I can sound old, when we were doing business in 2005, 6, 7, and 8, before everything went downhill, there was 100% financing. And what that 100% financing was, the 20% loan that you would see here in a first trust deed, and the 80% financing here and 20% financing here, which is basically we were able to finance the buyer's down payment. That doesn't exist anymore. I'm so happy that it doesn't. So we're not going to worry about this right now. Here's my balance of down payment. We talked about that a little bit a minute ago, that is my down payment minus my deposit amount, because my deposit is part of my down payment. Okay. Now moving on. Now remember, we're still, anything in this grid is paragraph 3. So this is now paragraph 3G1. Okay. Still in paragraph 3. So we're on the next page, but we're still on paragraph 3. If there are any credits that we're requesting, this is where it goes. So if I'm asking for a closing cost credit, let's say, for example, I need, $10,000 in closing costs, then that's where it's going to go. My $10,000 deposit, my request for closing costs is going to go right there. And by default, it's closing costs. I would leave it alone. I wouldn't, maybe you could put in here like rate buy down and the lender will be okay with it, but generally seller credit to apply to closing costs is good enough. Okay. If you guys are asking for closing costs, especially still in this market, it's funny to me that I know that we see more and more buyers are getting closing costs paid for, and buyers are requesting closing costs. I know it still happens. Or I know that it is happening. But when we talk about writing an offer, and we've talked about this on other classes and in other meetings, is your job as buyer's agent is to make sure that I'm drafting the strongest offer possible, right? That's my job. And the best way to have strong offers is to not just guess at closing costs, right? So I have seen, and I see it all the time, and I talk to agents all the time where they're like, well, the lender says we could get 4% closing costs, right? So I'm just going to ask for what? I'm going to ask for $25,000 in closing costs, even though I don't need it, right? It's 3%, whatever it is. I'm going to ask for all this closing. I don't need it, but I'm going to ask for it. Well, that's two issues that it creates by doing that. One is, when I receive your offer as listing agent and I'm getting ready to present the offers to my seller, and I do net sheets based on the offers, because you guys should be doing that. You should be doing a net sheet based on the offers as they are presented, so that the sellers see this is what you're actually getting if you chose this offer. You should do that. And if I do that, then I have to show that they're paying $25,000 closing costs, even if the buyer doesn't need it. So what does that do? Now it looks like they're netting $25,000 less than they should have, or $10,000 less than they should have, because we're not asking for the right amount. So if you're going to ask for closing cost credits, if that's a necessity for you, then find out exactly what they need. Talk to the lender and say, okay, I'm going to ask them for closing cost credit because I know they need some assistance. How much money do they need? And now if your lender says to you, oh, just ask for 3% because that's what's no way. If your lender's telling you that, forget it. I want to know exactly what the dollar amount is that they need in order to close this, because I need to write a strong offer. So if you want your client to close, right, you want to get paid lender, then help me write a good offer. What is the amount they need? Okay. And I'm going to talk about it. We'll talk about it a little bit later when we get into like paragraph 5E, the explanation paragraphs. But you have to understand that credits can be disallowed. Okay. And this is where the second problem comes from. When you just put out, a blanket, I want 4% or 3% or whatever, that amount. Now, when you write the offer, your buyer is expecting to get that money. Even if their closing costs don't equal that money, in their head, they're thinking, I'm getting $25,000 back, so I'm saving money on the purchase of this house. When it turns out their final closing costs are maybe 12 or 13 or 15,000, so 10,000 of that credit they thought they were getting gets returned back to the seller. They don't get it. The seller gets it. And so now what happens is your buyer starts thinking, well, where's the rest of my money? There's $10,000 I didn't get, because they're going to see on their closing statement that they only got a credit for 10,000. And the way credits are structured, if your lender's giving them any kind of credit, if you've agreed to give them any kind of credit, that comes out first. That comes out first. So let's say the lender's giving them a couple thousand, and you decided to give them $1,000 to help them out, and then you ask for this giant credit. Well, okay, total closing costs are 15,000. You got 2 from the lender, that comes out first. So now there's $13,000 left for closing costs. Then you paid 1,000. Now there's 12,000. So we asked for 25,000 from the seller, but there's only 12,000 left over. So now 13,000 goes back. So you have to be smart about it, because the buyers will get upset. The buyers will get upset if the credit doesn't work out the way they want it. You have to explain to them that the lender has the right to disallow the credits, and they only allow so much. The underwriter is the one who decides that. So get really, really tactical about how you're asking for closing costs. Have that conversation with the lender and get to the exact penny of what your buyer needs. Okay? That's the right way to do it. And now, like I said already, additional financing terms, what goes here, buyer may pursue hard money financing. Buyer is getting hard money financing or private money financing. Maybe you're right, is buyer is qualifying for a down payment assistance program. Now, it didn't type. I was doing all that garbage typing that I do for no reason. It didn't work. But anyway, if I write in there, buyers, the reason I have to disclose that the buyer's getting some kind of down payment assistance program is because it usually takes a little longer to get the qualification. If I know the name of the program, put it in. Don't just put down payment assistance, put what it is. Put the grant or the city of LA assistance, whatever. Okay, getting credit, and this is from the chat. Matthew says, getting a credit helped me close my last deal. Yes, of course. Of course it is. Even if you put closing costs to be used for non-recurring, they're really nobody uses the verbiage of recurring and non-recurring anymore. It's just closing cost general. That used to be an old, thing that was a requirement that certain lenders wouldn't allow for recurring costs to be paid, and they would only pay non-recurring. That doesn't really happen anymore. They're not that strict about it. So you don't need to worry about recurring and non-recurring. Okay, any other questions about the credits or additional financing before we move on? All right. Next, this paragraph 3G3 here has seemed to become quite confusing to agents here in this brokerage and outside, because I get to look at the offers and I get to hear the questions and see the issues that we're dealing with. This paragraph 3G3, what it says is, it says that seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. If that's true, if they are requesting that, they have to incorporate the CAR form SPBB, right? Seller's broker's offer, if any, to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. So let's explain what this means. We've talked about it in the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement class that we had. And with the changes of that, they've made it so that if I have a buyer representation agreement where a buyer is agreeing to pay me some compensation in that agreement, I have to disclose to them all of the compensation that I may be receiving on an offer that they're writing or a property that they're looking at. What this section is talking about is if I have that buyer representation agreement with my buyer, and my buyer says, look, I can't afford to pay you your compensation because the compensation that's in that agreement says, that agreement says that, let's say, for example, I have an agreement on that buyer broker representation agreement that my buyer is going to pay me 3% as compensation for helping them purchase a home. What it says in that contract is that whatever I get paid from somebody else gets deducted from that. So, for example, if I write an offer on a property that the broker is offering 2% to cooperating brokers, there's a gap of 1% between the commitment that my buyer made to me and what the seller or the listing agent is paying me. Technically, per that agreement, I could turn around to my buyer and say, okay, great, I'm getting 2 from them. You're going to pay me that extra 1. We could do that. What this is the buyer is now requesting, saying, look, I have to pay you the extra 1. So I want seller to pay that extra 1, which means that now my offer that was $900 with $25,000 in closing costs requested, and now I'm asking you for an additional 1% in commission. So I'm asking you for another $9,000 to get paid to commission to my buyer's agent. So now I've just reduced what I've offered you. I've reduced your net by $34,000 by making this request. And that's what this is. This has nothing to do with the compensation that's being paid for in the MLS. Nothing. So don't check it unless your buyer is obligated to pay you commission and you're requesting that the seller pays their obligation. That's all it is. Not because they're paying. That's not how it works. So please, please, please do not check this box off unless you fit into that category of your buyer is requesting that the seller pay you what they were supposed to pay you. Go ahead, Jesus. You have your hand up.
Yes, but if we're charging the buyer and the buyer, excuse me, is paying separately, not the seller, but the buyer itself, we don't check anything, correct?
No. If your buyer's paying that, you don't have to do anything because you have the buyer representation agreement that's stating that they're going to pay it. That just gets turned into escrow like a listing agreement would.
And the seller or the listing agent won't see it. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, it has nothing to do with them. Doesn't matter.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about this paragraph specifically, 3G3, the seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer? Anybody? No? All right. So just 99.9% of the offers you write, you're not going to check that box. Okay? That's it. Just know that. And if you feel like you have to, if you have questions, you come see me, you email me, you call me, we'll figure it out. Okay? All right. Next up, verification of all cash. The default is it's attached with the offer, which is great. That's how it should be. End of story. That's it. Send your proof of funds, whether that proof of funds be the 401k we talked about 15 minutes ago, or it's your bank account, whatever it is, send it with your offer. Okay. Verification of down payment, right? All that stuff, send it with verification of loan application, whether it's a pre-qual, a DU, a pre-approval, whatever it is, check off what it is and send it with your offer. I can't imagine that there's a buyer's agent that doesn't send all this stuff. But if there is, and you're seeing this, please, you do not have a complete offer without all of these items being attached to your package to submit to a seller, to a listing agent. Look, here's the thing. It's like, again, to sound super old, we as buyer's agents used to present our offers to the listing agent and the seller in person, which means I sat down across this from the seller and the listing agent, and I went through my offer and explained everything that was happening. That doesn't happen anymore. So the way you write an offer and the way you package your offer, the way that offer gets delivered is the only chance you have to let the listing agent know that I'm a professional and this is who you want to work with. I mean, besides conversations you had when you're submitting it, and those conversations help. So you got to make sure you're doing that too. But if you're sending offers without this stuff attached, you're putting yourself already behind the 8 ball and making it harder to get your offer accepted. That's it. Okay. Next up, paragraph 3J, final verification of condition. That is your final walkthrough, and it is done 5 days prior to close of escrow. Now, even if the seller is going to remain in possession of the property for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, 60 days after close of escrow, you still have to do your walkthrough prior to close of escrow. I see so many times where it says, buyer is going to do walkthrough after seller moves out. Well, now you're the owner. So if there's something wrong with the property, you got tenants. Now you got to try to prove that it wasn't like that before you closed escrow. Because if you let it close escrow like that, then you're responsible for it. So I don't care how long the seller is remaining in possession. 5 days prior to close of escrow, do your damn walkthrough. And if your buyer can't do it 5 days prior, then guess what you're going to do? You're going to extend your escrow because you're not closing without doing that walkthrough. I know that there are people that are watching this live right now and that will be watching this video later that have closed an escrow without doing a walkthrough, and you are playing with fire. Okay? It's a bad idea. I promise you it is a bad idea, and one of these days it will come back to bite you if you're doing that. So everybody that can hear my voice right now, I don't care if the property is vacant, if the seller's going to be there for a month after you close, do your walkthrough 5 days prior to closing. Now, if a seller is in possession of the property after the close of escrow, I've now done my walkthrough before I closed, so we know the condition of the property before I closed. When I have a seller that lives in the property and I do an SIP or a residential lease after sale, there is an amount of money that is essentially a security deposit that says this is going to stay in escrow until you move out based on this agreement that we have. Now, when they move out and you go and look at the property and they've beat the crap out of it, then you say, well, I'm not going to release their deposit. I'm not going to release that money that they put in there. On an SIP, it's called delivery of possession fee. Right? So that's there, a delivery of possession fee. It's in the SIP. If you're not putting one in, then you screwed yourself. And on a residential lease after sale, when somebody stays there 30 days or more, they have a deposit, just like any other rental. And so if you go in and they've trashed the place, then you start taking from that deposit. So basically, you're going to do your walkthrough before, and then you're going to treat it like any other tenant. When they move out, you're going to look at the condition of the property and go, wait a minute, you guys didn't leave the property in the same condition it was in when I closed escrow. So I'm going to withhold your delivery of possession fee, or I'm going to take from your deposit. Period. You treat them like a tenant. So please, 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 please do not forego the final walkthrough before you close. Now, the 5 days, and this is why the 5 days are important. 5 days prior to close of escrow, what's happened at 5 days prior? 5 days prior, you haven't signed loan docs yet, right? So if there is a problem with that walkthrough, then you've got some time where you can extend the close of escrow, right? I can extend close of escrow. See, the final walkthrough is not a contingency. So just because the property is not in the condition it was supposed to be in when you close doesn't necessarily mean your buyer has the right to cancel. They could be putting their deposit in jeopardy if they've canceled, if they've removed all their contingencies, and now based on the close of escrow or the final walkthrough, they say, I'm out. I don't want this anymore because it's not in the condition that it was supposed to be in, or they didn't complete repairs. That's not how it works. Okay. So if I do the things the right way, my lender sends me that, hey, we got the clear, we can order loan docs, right? We can get those. Terrific. Thank you. Don't order those yet. Go to my buyer. Look, we're very close to closing. The lender says we can order loan docs, or that we can get loan docs tomorrow or whatever. I need to call and schedule your final walkthrough. I go do the walkthrough. If everything's cool, they did the repairs that we agreed upon, the property's in the same condition as when I wrote the offer, then I call the lender back and say, we're good. We did the walkthrough, order the docs, we sign docs, we fund, we record, we're out. That's it. Now, if I do it like most of you do it, it's the very last thing I think of because, oh my gosh, I have to make sure I have a walkthrough in there so I don't, delay getting my closing check, my commission check. And we do it the day it records or the day before it records. We've already signed docs, we've already funded, we're probably recording, and they go and do a walkthrough and they find out, oh crap, they damaged the walls, something is missing, they didn't finish a repair they were supposed to, and now you have no time to negotiate the walkthrough, the condition of the property. You've got to close with that property in that condition because you guys as agents didn't do your job and make sure your buyer does their walkthrough before 5 days prior so that you can negotiate on their behalf. Now, Just because we do things the right way and we ask them to make it the way they were supposed to make good on their promises, doesn't mean they will. And then what we do is you have the conversation with the buyer. Say, okay, let's say, for example, we negotiated repairs, whatever those repairs may be. We go to do our final walkthrough. We do it before we've signed docs. We have plenty of time to negotiate and extend. And we go and we find out that they didn't do the repairs. So we go back to the listing agent. We say, hey, listen, we need to extend escrow because you guys didn't complete the repairs. You didn't finish the repairs you were supposed to. And then, we need some more time so that you guys can go in and repair it. How much time do you need to do those repairs? And the seller says, we're not doing them. We're just not going to do the repairs. Okay. So now we have a decision to make. What happens is the buyer can't cancel, or they may put their deposit in jeopardy, but they're being forced to close. The buyer would then have to go after the seller civilly after the close of escrow for the unfinished repairs or for the condition that you've noticed. So you have to know that just because we do things right, not everybody else out there does their things right, and they don't honor what they're supposed to, and things like that happen. So there may be times where you do your walkthrough and you still have to close with a property that's not in the condition you wanted to, and then help your buyers through the process of civilly going after the seller for damages and what they have to do. So I got a couple things in the chat. Let me look at these real quick. Tell them why I feel so strong about doing the final walkthrough. I can't think of a specific thing, but we've had plenty of trouble with stuff being not right at the walkthrough and then having to deal with lawsuits, but I don't know what this comment is specifically talking about. Let me say here, Kyle, I do it when they sign loan docs. That's bad, huh? But I say I won't allow it to fund if the walkthrough is a mess. Is that okay? I won't do that. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, you can delay the funding, but only for so long, right? Like once you sign loan docs, it's really, everything is sped up. Like you can postpone things, but only for a certain amount of time before they have to be redone. So I look at it this way, like for 25 days, we're pushing a boulder up a hill in a transaction, right? And then when we get to that loan docs, we've gotten to the peak, and now everything's starting to roll downhill. So it's a lot harder to stop a boulder from running downhill because it's just out of control, right? And that's kind of like where we're at. We're in a position where there's not a lot of flexibility or time. So, it's fine that you're doing it that way and that you can delay some things to negotiate it, but it's just a lot less pressure and much easier to negotiate if it's prior to signing the docs. That's all. That's just my opinion, though. Okay, Lancaster property. I don't remember what that is. Too many things go in front of me, and I have a horrible memory. Can the closing be postponed when the agreed? Yeah. Okay. Yes, it can be, as long as everybody agrees, right? But you have to make the request as buyer's agent, right? Like, here's the issue that happens is that sometimes, even though we're trying to do the right thing, right? So I do my walkthrough early. I do it before I sign docs. I do it at the right time, 5 days before I close. And then there's some things that aren't finished. The repairs aren't completed, or the property's not in the condition that we expected it to be, right? That happens. And then I call the listing agent and say, hey, these things aren't done. The repairs aren't completed, that kind of stuff. I have to go through that and have that conversation. And then the seller says, well, we're not doing it. And instead of us still making the request in writing to extend and delay and to do those things, we go back to our buyer and say, yeah, they're not going to do it. So what do you want to do? See, now the problem is we don't look like we did our job, even though we did. We don't have any proof that we did it. So if something really goes south where it becomes very expensive for our buyer to be responsible for taking care of the things because we asked them to close escrow because the seller said no, we don't have any proof that we even tried to act on their behalf. So the buyer could go back and say, well, my agent is responsible too because they didn't try to help me. So even if, excuse me, even if the listing agent were to say to me, we're not doing it, sorry, you guys have to close like that. Terrific. I understand your position. I go back to my buyer and I say, okay, this is their position, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to ask for an extension of time. We're going to put on the verification of property condition all the things that are wrong, and we're going to send them an amendment of existing agreement terms to go along with it, requesting that all of these things be completed as per the agreement before closing. We're going to send that. Now, if they reject all that stuff, then I can go back to my buyer and say, okay, look, we did what we could. We can't force them to do things. We can't go in there and twist their arm until they do it. But what we've done now is we've shown that we're trying to do things the right way and they're not. So it's up to you. Your deposit could be in jeopardy if you don't want to close because they're not doing what they said. And we may have to fight for it. And we'll probably get it back, but who knows? Or we close because you guys really want the house. We find out what it's going to cost to make those repairs, get those repairs done, and then go after them civilly to get reimbursed for the amount of work we do. And we'll talk about why I said do the work. It's just, it helps our case. But that's it. But yeah, if I send it to the seller and say, I need an extension of time, you guys agree to fix this or whatever, or now here's the problem. Can't do credits at that point because then you'd have to redraw docs. You'd have to start over again. It would delay it a lot farther if you did credits. So try to stay away from credits that late. Maybe if they want to leave some money payable to a contractor to complete the repairs, that's cool too. But yes, you can negotiate the extension as long as everybody agrees. So sorry, that was a long answer, Jenny, but I hope it helped. All right, so we're at let's go a little bit farther. Okay, we'll finish with assignment request. I think we could get there. Assignment request, paragraph 3K. So for those of you that don't know what assignment is there is one buyer, and that buyer either wants to assign the entire sale to another buyer, wants to add a buyer to them, right? So let's say originally I write the offer just in my name, and then I want to add a co-borrower or another buyer later. So I write the offer and I say, okay, we're going to do an assignment, a request to assign the property to add in Jesus to be the buyer with me, to be my partner on the purchase. I have 17 days to make that request. And when I make that request, the seller has the right to accept it or deny it. But I only have 17 days to make that request per the contract. If I make it outside of that, I'm outside of the contract, so it doesn't even matter if the seller doesn't have to accept it, doesn't have to do anything. They don't even have to honor it that I'm making the request. They can ignore it. If I want to remove somebody, is basically the same thing. Now, in most cases, the seller probably doesn't care about adding or removing people. I mean, I would about adding. Removing, not so much, right? If there was two of us, let's say Jesus and I started together as partners, we bought the property, and then I was like, I want Jesus out of here. We do the assignment of agreement addendum, and we remove him as a borrower, as a buyer. Doesn't really affect much because I'm still on. The things that are more concerning from a seller's perspective are a total assignment where the original purchaser is now not the purchaser any longer. And that happens a lot in these wholesale deals. Or adding another buyer because now it's like, is it going to extend the time based on the qualifications? Like now that we have to redo the loan, is there things? Those are concerns. So you just have to understand that's what that is. That's what an assignment request is. Assignment is not just giving it to everybody. An assignment request is adding, removing, or totally assigning. Okay. So you have to know that. And the form that we want to use for that is an assignment of agreement addendum. That's the only form we use. Nothing else, not an amendment of existing agreement terms, not a blank addendum, which you guys got to get away from those damn addendums. I'm so tired of hearing addendum. It's amendment of existing agreement terms. That's how you negotiate and make changes to the contract. But in this case, whenever there's an assignment, whether it's a total or it's a partial, you got to use the assignment of agreement addendum. Okay. All right. 11:57. Any questions before I let you guys go? Anybody have any questions?
Kyle, more
yes,
than
sir.
a quick comment. Why do you emphasize so much the assignment, the
amendment of existing agreement terms as opposed to an addendum? Okay, so and we've talked about this in previous classes. An amendment of existing agreement terms is meant for negotiating because it has an expiration date. And it has an active spot for the person that is receiving the amendment to reject it, right? There's a rejection and there's an acceptance, okay? So if the seller, for example, is sending me the amendment as buyer, if I reject it, I just initial the rejection and send it back. And if I ignore it, well, it expires in 3 days, just like a purchase agreement does. So it can't be floating out there and making any changes. An addendum, on the other hand, has no active rejection and it has no expiration. So again, I know this is an extreme thing, but let's say that we negotiate terms on addendum number 1. And then the seller doesn't like it, so they send me an addendum number 2, changing the terms. And then I send them addendum number 3, changing the terms again. And then the seller says, you know what? I really like addendum number 1. I'm going to go ahead and sign it, even though we've now changed terms. Now I have addendum number 1 that's fully executed, addendum number 2 that's only partially executed, and addendum number 3 partially executed. Or vice versa. Let's say there was an addendum 1 that only one party signed, an addendum 2 that only one party signed, and then addendum 3 that all of us signed. What happens is, as agents, we leave out addendum 1 and 2. And so then all of a sudden escrow or whoever, the lender, sees addendum 3 and they're like, we need addendum 1 and 2. And so it's too, what's the word, chaotic with addendums. But amendments, when we're making changes to a contract, that amendment has a very clear timeline. It has a rejection and an acceptance, and that's why I prefer it. Addendums are for, I need space, right? Like, these 3 lines don't give me enough to explain what I'm talking about. That's what the addendum is for, and that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Virginia, you have your hand up. I think it's Virginia. It says iPhone,
So,
Virginia.
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have you on my phone. So coincidence, I'm writing up an addendum, so I'm being a bad girl. So this is what's going on. So we accepted, or we did a request for repairs, back and forth, finally agreed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is they're giving my client, I'm representing buyer, giving my client a credit, $1,500, and they're going to leave the washer and dryer and refrigerator.
Okay.
I was writing it on the addendum because we had already agreed to it. But no, it needs to go on the modification.
No, amendment of existing.
The amendment
terms.
of existing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Now that one, because that one, I'm trying to do it where I can simplify it for the lender.
Well, okay. So you did a request for repairs. Their response to the request for repairs was, we'll give you a $1,500 credit and leave these items behind. Yes. Right? Okay. Yes. So the request for repairs just stays with your file.
Okay.
You could do one amendment that says, or you could do it together. Then you do an amendment of existing agreement terms that says, point 1 is seller to credit buyer $1,500 for closing costs. And point 2 is seller agrees to leave washer, dryer, and, refrigerator behind.
Okay.
You could do that and submit that to escrow so that the lender can approve that. But the request for repairs and that amendment are 2 separate things. It's just an agreement that we're just now to put together. It's closing costs that you're crediting us, because that's the only credit that you guys are allowed is closing costs. Now, this is the problem. This is what we go back to the credits that we talked about a little while ago, is we get a little willy-nilly with credits. And if we've already got a closing cost credit that we negotiated, and now all of a sudden we have to do a credit for repairs, so we have to increase that closing cost credit. If any of that closing cost credit gets denied by the lender, then now the buyer isn't getting their repairs paid for. Right? Something's missing. So we have to be really conscious of where we're going with credits, how much credit we have available, and are we using it the right way? That's it. But amendment, and you can put both of those things on one amendment of existing agreement terms. All right, guys. You're welcome. Okay. All right. So 12:02. We went a little bit long. I appreciate you guys all being here. Thank you so much. And we'll continue this in a couple weeks. Or no, not a couple weeks. Next week. If you missed any of this, YouTube. Okay. And you can check out all the other ones too, all the other classes. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.